I'm Danielle Morgan, 32 years old, living in the northern suburbs of Denver, Colorado. For nearly a decade, I've dedicated my entire youth to our family's construction company, Morgan & Co. Construction. In my mind, there was never a plan B. Only one path: to become the rightful successor to the legacy my father built from nothing. Since I was a child, I grew up around the roar of drills and the scent of plaster lingering on my father's shirts. By the time I was 8, I could tell the difference between a technical blueprint and a three-dimensional rendering. At 12, I spent my entire summer answering phones at the front desk and organizing files in the accounting room. Every time a client complimented my manners, my father, Franklin Morgan, would proudly pat my shoulder and laugh. "This girl's got the business sense, just like someone I know." He never said many sweet things, but the way he looked at me always felt like a promise. One day, this will all be yours. That promise took root in my heart and became the fuel for everything. While my friends dreamed of becoming pilots or fashion designers, I had one dream: to turn Morgan & Co. into the leading civil construction firm in Colorado. I turned down 3 job offers from top infrastructure design firms in Seattle, Houston, and Atlanta. Graduating with honors in construction management, I came back to Denver and walked into my father's office on the Monday right after commencement. No career honeymoon, no time to breathe. I dove headfirst into the rhythm of the company like I was born to sit in that project coordinator's chair. I was the one turning on the office lights every snowy winter morning, and the last to leave during every contract push. During peak seasons, I slept on the office couch, used a notebook as a pillow. I remembered every major client's name, their anniversaries, their pets, even their preferred kitchen flooring. I was the one who revamped our entire record system, moved our data from paper to digital platforms. I recommended project tracking software that cut down execution delays by nearly 40%. Revenue nearly doubled in 4 years thanks to those changes. My name wasn't on the company signage, but nearly everything inside carried my fingerprints. As for my personal life, let's just say it barely existed. The 2 most serious relationships I've ever had ended for the same reason. You love your job more than you love me. Maybe they were right, but I still believe I was doing the right thing. I wasn't working for accolades. I was working for the future of Morgan & Co. and for the belief that one day this company would rightfully be mine. My apartment was only a place to shower and change clothes. Old friends stopped inviting me out because I always said, "I'm finalizing an estimate." I missed my best friend's wedding because I had to negotiate a contract worth nearly $1 million with a resort developer. But I had no regrets. I believed every sacrifice today was a brick laid toward the position I deserved tomorrow. No one forced me to do it. No one needed to push me to stay in the office until almost midnight or skip Thanksgiving to inspect site progress. I chose that path, freely, consciously, because I believed I was the chosen successor. Because my father, with his eyes, his words, and years of quiet confidence, had planted that belief in me. I truly thought that if I just kept working hard, one day he would hand me the key to the heart of the company. But I forgot one crucial thing. In my family, trust is never guaranteed. I still remember the day my sister came back. It was a cloudy Tuesday afternoon in April last year. I had just wrapped up a quarterly budget presentation with the finance board when my phone rang. It was Mom. She never called during work hours, so I picked up, concerned. "Danielle, your sister's home. Can you come for dinner tonight? The whole family should be together for once." I froze. My sister, Savannah Morgan, 34 years old, the golden child my parents always spoke of with a bittersweet kind of longing, the one who dropped out her senior year to pursue photography in Prague, who'd lived in Lisbon, then Bali, then New York, never staying in one place more than a year, who missed every Thanksgiving, Christmas, and my birthdays for almost a decade. And now, suddenly, she was back. That evening, I sat across from Savannah at the same kitchen table where Mom had laid out my favorite honey-glazed chicken, though she made sure to say it was for both her daughters. Savannah wore a flowing white linen dress, her hair casually tied in a messy bun, and still carried that effortless confidence like she'd never stumbled a day in her life. "You're doing great, Danny." She tilted her head with a smile. "Dad talks about you constantly, how you're a brilliant manager, clients love you. You're the one keeping it all running." I smiled politely. "Thanks. Every company needs someone to keep the wheels turning." "Sure," she said, "but I think the company could use a spark, a little creative magic." Her eyes sparkled like she was already setting something in motion. I didn't understand what she meant until the following Monday. Ed called me into a side meeting room next to his office. Savannah was already there, smiling, with a fresh coffee in hand like she belonged. "Danielle," Dad began, "I'd like to introduce Savannah's new role. Starting today, she'll be our brand creative director. She'll help reshape our company identity, from presentation decks to the website to how we approach potential clients. The market's evolving, and I believe it's time we do too." I looked at her. Her gaze didn't flinch. Her smile stayed soft, but something in the way she sipped her coffee felt ice cold. I didn't react. I simply nodded and said, "That's fine. I'll inform the design team to coordinate." But inside, something cracked. For 8 years, I'd carried the operational system on my back, refining workflows, putting out fires, navigating us through a pandemic. I had never once been introduced with such fanfare. I was given tasks, and I completed them. No spotlight, no applause. Within a month, Savannah became the darling of every meeting. Every presentation now bore her redesigned logo, more playful font, a more inspiring color palette. Dad, the same man who had once refused to change our domain name because the old one works fine, now praised her publicly. Savannah's brought a fresh breeze to Morgan & Co. He even began calling us the perfect succession duo, a phrase meant to sound diplomatic, but it diluted a role that had once clearly belonged to me. Savannah clocked in at 9:30 every morning and left by 4. She took 90-minute lunch breaks. Occasionally, she posted snapshots of our meeting rooms on Instagram with captions like "brainstorming brilliance," "family business," "creative flow." I said nothing because, admittedly, her changes were well received. 2 recent model home presentations got glowing feedback thanks to her visuals, but deep down, it stung each time I watched Dad turn to her in meetings and ask, "Savannah, what do you think?" I was still the one meeting deadlines, reviewing contracts, preparing quarterly reports, fixing HR disputes, but Dad's eyes had begun to drift to where the ideas were shinier, the colors brighter. Started to feel like the seasoned employee, still respected but considered past her peak. And Savannah? She was the shiny new bet, the investment with upside. I didn't say a word. I kept doing my job. But each night when I got home, I reopened old files, reviewed past reports, reread internal communications I'd archived. I needed to know, was there something I had missed? I didn't know what I was looking for back then, but somewhere deep inside, a seed of doubt had been planted, not just doubt in my sister, but in every promise ever spoken inside the house that bore the Morgan name. I didn't know what made me linger in my father's office that day. Maybe it was intuition, maybe it was the smell of old paper and the familiar humming of the photocopier outside. Or maybe it was the brief, evasive glance exchanged between my father and my sister that morning when I asked about the Everpine townhouse contract, the project I had managed from the bidding phase. "Dad already sent the original to legal for re-signing," he said, a little quicker than usual. "You can check the scanned copy in the system." But there was no copy in the system, and I knew my father never sent out the original without keeping a photocopy. That was his golden rule, repeated since I was just an intern. So I went back to the basement archive room, only Eleanor, the longtime assistant and office manager, and I still remembered which file drawers jammed, which old boxes were mislabeled. I opened drawer after drawer, flipping through stack after stack, searching not just for the contract, but for something else I couldn't name. Then I saw it. A Blackbound document with no clear label. tucked between a 2009 land transfer file and a 2013 bank loan agreement. Curious, I pulled it out. The front read, Share transfer, Morgan and Co., construction, April 17th, only 4 months ago. I opened to the first page and my heart nearly stopped. Transfer of 72% of Franklin Morgan's shares to Savannah R. Morgan, remaining 18% retained under Franklin Morgan, 10% to Linda R. Morgan. No mention of me, not one line, not a single footnote. I read it again, then again. My brain screamed, this can't be right. It must be a draft, a mistake. But it wasn't. Everything was legally binding, notarized, stamped, dated. No mention of temporary, proxy, or provisional. My hands went cold. The room seemed to shrink. The air thickened. I had to grip the shelving to stay on my feet. It took me a minute to stand upright again. A light knock sounded behind me. Eleanor. Danielle, what are you looking for? I turned. My eyes met hers. A flicker of hesitation, then something that looked almost like guilt. You knew about this, didn't you? My voice was hoarse, my hand still gripping the document. How long? She didn't answer right away, just sighed and stepped inside, quietly closing the door. Your father planned to tell you after things settled down. He thought you'd understand. Understand what? I nearly shouted. Understand why he quietly gave away the entire company to my sister, the one who hasn't even been back a year, who's never spent a single hour on site. Eleanor looked at me, eyes full of sorrow. Danielle, this isn't your fault. And it's not entirely Savannah's either. Your father believes the company needs a fresh direction, and he thinks you're too stuck in the old ways. Stuck? I let out a bitter laugh. I call it keeping the company alive through a recession, a pandemic, and a dozen financial blunders he caused. She stayed silent. I brushed past her, the document in my hand, storming up the stairs so fast I nearly tripped. I don't even remember how I drove home, but when I pulled into the garage, I was still clutching the folder. Cold sweat trickled down my neck, my palms soaked. I collapsed into the armchair in my living room, phone turned off. Outside, night was falling, the city lit up, and I sat there, alone, with a pain that burned quietly inside me. I remembered every time my father had said, "This future is yours, Danny." I had believed him, with all my youth, and everything I gave up. In return, I got betrayal, notarized and signed. I held the document, tempted to rip it apart. But I stopped. No. This evidence had to stay intact. A thought surfaced, at first just a vague outline, then sharper, solid. If the company was no longer mine, then they no longer had the right to assume I'd keep it running. If they chose Savannah, then Savannah could carry the weight. I stood up, turned on the lights, and opened my laptop. Not to work, but to begin planning my exit. I didn't sleep that entire night. Every line in the share transfer agreement felt like a slow blade cutting through my memory. 4 months. They had kept this from me for 4 whole months. Every meeting, every lunch, every compliment tossed Savannah's way happened while they already knew, and yet pretended nothing had changed. And me? I still showed up at the office every day at 7 a.m., tackling the backlog of files left by the so-called creative director, thinking I was still walking the path of succession. They let me believe that. They let me serve a dream that had already been stolen from my hands. The next morning, I woke up to a strange emptiness. No laptop, no emails. I put on a black-collared shirt and jeans, something I'd never wear to the office because it wasn't professional. But today, I wasn't going in to impress anyone. I texted Mom, "I'll come home for dinner tonight. Everyone will be there." She replied in under 5 minutes, adding a smiley face. "Perfect. Dad and Savannah will be there too. I'll make your favorite beef stew." Perfect. I arrived at exactly 6 p.m. The red brick house with the white porch where I'd grown up was still the same, but today it felt like it wore a colder coat of paint. I didn't knock. I didn't need permission to enter the home I once thought was my last safe place. Mom was wearing her apron. The smell of cardamom from the stew filled the air. Dad sat at the dining table, reading the newspaper with soft, classical music playing from the kitchen speaker. Savannah was setting the silverware. White shirt, hair in a neat bun like she'd just walked off a brand campaign shoot. Danielle! Mom beamed, arms open to hug me. I let her. I didn't hug back. Want a glass of wine? Savannah asked, holding up a freshly opened bottle of red. No need. I want to be clear-headed tonight, I said, voice sharp as a razor. All three of them froze. Dad looked up, eyebrows furrowed. I pulled out a chair at the head of the table, placed a black document folder squarely on the wooden surface, then opened it, said nothing, let them read. Savannah glanced at the first line and froze. Mom raised a hand to her mouth. Dad, who rarely showed emotion, went completely still. I found it in the archive, I said, voice calm and cold. Strange. A decision this huge, and no one thought I should be told. Danielle, Mom stammered, your dad planned to tell you when the time was right? The right time? I let out a bitter laugh. So, the past 4 months weren't right enough? Or were you waiting until I was officially pushed out before calling it the perfect moment? Dad put the paper down. You're being too emotional. I slammed the folder shut. Don't talk to me about emotion when you're the one who signed me away. Savannah spoke, her voice softer than usual. It's not what you think. You still have a valuable role. Valuable? I cut her off. I'm the one who pulled the company through last year's financial crisis. I renegotiated labor contracts, optimized operating costs, and turned the Hillside project from a loss to profit in 3 weeks. But the one-handed executive control is the girl who returned less than a year ago and once called time off forms freedom with conditions. Silence. Only the bubbling stew in the pot made a sound. Danielle, Dad said, voice stern. Savannah brings a fresh perspective, creativity. You're too rigid, too fixed. I see. So 10 years of commitment is rigid. System thinking is fixed. But grainy black and white photos of keychains and ceiling lamps, that's the vision of the future? Savannah lowered her head, for once, without a reply. I stood, my voice lowered but crystal clear. I'll ask one question. Would any of you have ever told me the truth if I hadn't stumbled across that file? Silence. Thanks. That's all I needed to know. I picked up the folder, locking eyes with each of them. This isn't a threat, it's an announcement. Starting tomorrow, I'm no longer working for Morgan & Co. You can't, Mom gasped. You're the heart of the company. No. I looked straight at my father. I was just a spare gear, and now I'm removing myself from the machine. Then I turned, walking away from the house where everything once began. I thought I had completely cut ties after that night, but life doesn't work like a movie ending when the character walks out the door. 3 days after I officially submitted my resignation via email, no explanation, no sugarcoating, I got a call from Eleanor. Her voice was low, like she was afraid someone might be listening. Danielle, I think you should come see this. I hesitated. I don't work there anymore. This directly involves you. They're about to present the Everpine project. I frowned. Everpine was the concept I had developed over 2 years, presented to my father back in February. He had called it too risky, unrealistic, and told me to shelve it. But I had never deleted it from the system. I had saved all the drafts, market segmentation strategies, budget details, and a 4-phase rollout plan. That afternoon, I drove to the company like a stranger. I used my old access card. Eleanor hadn't revoked it. She led me to conference room 2, cracked the door just enough for me to see through the mirrored glass. Savannah was standing in front of a large screen, remote in hand, voice full of confidence. The Everpine project focuses on young families in the southern suburbs of Denver, blending sustainable design with flexible community spaces. We plan a 4-phase implementation over 26 months, with financial allocation set at 30, 40, 30. I held my breath. Not only was that my idea, it was an exact replica, word for word, chart by chart, down to the mint green slides I had spent months perfecting. Only one thing was different. The bottom corner of every page read, Savannah R. Morgan, Creative Director. I don't remember how I left the company. I just know that when I got home, I was shaking so badly I dropped my keys. I opened my laptop and pulled up the old files. Everything was there, intact. Time-stamped originals, my name as creator. There was no doubt my work had been stolen and rebranded under someone else's name. That night, I called my father directly. I need to meet with you, not at home, not at the office. Danielle, if you're calling tomorrow, 6 p.m., Darrow's Cafe on 5th Street, you should come. Otherwise, I'll be sending all of this to Everpine's partners and their legal department. Your choice. At 6:05 the next day, my father walked into the cafe, visibly tense. He had never been summoned like this in his life. I pointed to the chair across from me. No greetings. I opened my laptop. The screen split in two. On the left, the original presentation file I had saved 3 months ago. On the right, the version Savannah had used yesterday. What do you want, Danielle? I want to know who gave Savannah permission to copy my work and present it as hers. He said nothing. And another thing, I continued. If you're going to say this was a joint creative effort or a coincidence, I'll print out every internal email from my old account, every draft I sent, every rejection I got, and bring it to the investors' table. He sighed, lips pressed tight. Savannah only expanded on what you left behind. No. She copied everything. I leaned in. And you knew it. Danielle, this was a strategic decision. You're great at execution. Savannah's good at presentation. I just wanted to combine both strengths. I scoffed. You stole from me, slapped Savannah's name on it and called it strategy? If that's how you plan to run Morgan & Co., then prepare for legal action. You won't do that, he said, confident. Won't I? I pulled out a USB drive and placed it on the table. All the evidence is in here. If you want to keep this quiet, you have 2 days. After that, I go public, starting with an email to Everpine's investors, then the construction industry press. He stared at me, longer than usual. The eyes that once gave me comfort now looked like hollow symbols of decayed authority. What do you want? He finally asked. Credit. Remove Savannah's name from that project, and I want an apology. In writing. You think that's easy? I stood up. Easy or not, you have 2 days to decide. I'm not the daughter who stays late under fluorescent lights until 10 p.m. just to be called hardworking anymore. I walked away, still shaking, but for the first time in years, I wasn't bowing as I stepped out from my father's shadow. I was reclaiming myself. I didn't hear back from my father for 2 full days after our meeting at Darrow's. No email, no text, not a single call from the office. On the 3rd day, Eleanor sent me a short message. Everpine just withdrew their bid. They're asking the original lead, you, to confirm the current status. Savannah's panicking. Mr. Franklin hasn't shown up at the office this morning. I sat in my apartment, phone in hand, screen glowing with nothing but silence. For the first time in 10 years, I was legally disconnected from the company. But professionally, I knew I was the backbone of Morgan & Co. Without me, the system wouldn't last a month. Everpine wasn't just any name. It was a $9 million project with potential expansion across 3 states if the first phase succeeded. I was the one who negotiated directly, who built trust with the investor, Ms. Eleanor Wynne, over nearly 2 years. And now, when she called my personal phone at 9:18 a.m. on Wednesday, I knew she wasn't calling for a chat. Danielle, her voice was steady but colder than usual. I need to know clearly, are you still involved in overseeing the Everpine project? I've resigned. I see. She paused. I also saw last week's presentation. That was your draft, wasn't it? Yes. And Savannah Morgan had no contribution to it? Not a single line. Another pause. Then, we just sent a contract withdrawal notice. I won't sign anything unless you're on the leadership team. I understand, and I'm sorry for letting it get to this point. Don't apologize, she said, her voice softening for the first time. You were the reason we agreed to partner in the first place. Not because of the Morgan name, because of Danielle Morgan. After that call, I exhaled, but not entirely in relief. I knew this news would hit Morgan and Co. like a bomb, and I was right. That same evening, while I was standing in line at the grocery store near my apartment, my phone rang. It was Mom. Danielle, her voice trembled. Can you come back? No, we lost Everpine, you know that, right? I do. The investor called me directly. Savannah can't handle it. She's falling apart. I stayed silent. She continued, trying to fill the quiet. Your father, he's not himself. He hasn't said a word all day. And Eleanor says subcontractors are beginning to pull out over payment concerns. Still, I said nothing. Finally, she lowered her voice. Are you really going to let it all fall apart like this? I'm not letting anything fall, I said slowly. They did this to themselves. I'm just no longer willing to clean up after them. But this is our family's legacy. No, Mom, I interrupted. This is the legacy you all decided to hand to Savannah. So let her preserve it. I hung up. By noon the next day, I received an email from the company domain, not my father's, but Savannah's. The subject line read, "Please meet me." I opened the message. I can't justify what happened. I just want to meet, if you're willing. I'll come anywhere you choose. I need you, not for the company, but to understand. I didn't reply right away. Not until later that night, while cleaning out a drawer, I found the company growth plan I'd written when I was 26. In red ink, the paper crumpled after Dad had tossed it aside. Then I typed back. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, Maple and Pine Cafe. I didn't know what I'd say to Savannah, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to save Morgan and Co. If it wanted to survive, it would have to stand on the feet of the person they'd chosen instead of me. I had let go, and this time, I wasn't going back. I arrived at Maple and Pine right at 8 a.m. The Denver air still held a trace of morning mist, and the small bell above the door chimed as I pushed it open. The space smelled of fresh roasted coffee and newly baked waffles. Savannah was already seated at a table by the window, her hands wrapped around an untouched cappuccino. She stood when she saw me, but I gave only a slight nod and took a seat. No need for pleasantries. Thanks for coming, she began. I said nothing, placing my phone on the table, screen side down. You don't have to say anything, Savannah rushed to speak, as if afraid I'd get up and leave. I just wanted to admit I was wrong. And I raised an eyebrow, not hiding my skepticism. The Everpine proposal wasn't mine, I know that, and I shouldn't have allowed my name to be attached. I followed Dad's instructions, and I was too weak to push back, but now things are falling apart, and I get why. Still silent, I waited for the real reason she'd asked me here. Savannah swallowed hard. Dad's talking about asking you to come back. Oh, really? I tilted my head slightly. Because he thinks old school thinking might save a sinking ship? Savannah blushed. That's not what he meant. I understand perfectly well, I cut her off. And if he really wanted to talk, the invitation should have come from him, not you. She looked down, tracing her finger along the rim of her coffee cup. I stood, ready to leave when she stopped me with one sentence that made me pause. Dad said, if you agreed to return, he's willing to transfer a portion of his shares. I turned back and slowly sat down again. Did he say how much? Suggested 15% and a deputy executive title. I laughed. I'm not coming back to be a deputy to a failed creative director. If he wants me back, the terms are very clear. I pulled a notebook from my bag and flipped to the page I had already prepared. 40% ownership, I began, eyes fixed on Savannah. A voting seat on the board, executive director title, equal or higher than yours, and full control over the Everpine project, if it's still salvageable. 40%, she repeated, like the number came from another planet. I've kept the company running for nearly a decade, got it through 3 major crises. You've been back 11 months, 7 of which were spent doing long lunches and tweaking PowerPoint colors. Savannah fell silent. I continued, if the family wants me to rescue the legacy they once threw away, then they'll have to pay the price. I'm not doing charity anymore. She nodded slowly, then pulled out her phone. I'll relay this to Dad. 2 hours later, I got a call from an unknown number. I picked up. My father's voice came through, dry but controlled. Danielle, we need to talk. There's nothing to talk about without lawyers and a signed agreement, I said firmly. You're pushing this too far. No, Dad, I'm just playing by the rules. A moment of silence. Then he sighed. All right, tomorrow, 10 a.m., Harold's office. We'll talk like people at a negotiation table. I hung up, my hand gripping the phone, not out of fear, but because for the first time, I was in control. The next morning, I walked into Harold's office in a smoke gray suit, hair neatly tied back, carrying a file prepared down to the last detail. Project contribution reports, revenue growth analysis, letters of endorsement from 3 major clients, all proving one thing. I wasn't an employee. I was the backbone. My father was already seated with Harold and my mother beside him. Savannah wasn't there. Better that way. Danielle, Harold began, we've reviewed your terms. I didn't blink. Your father has agreed in principle. I nodded. I want a signed agreement today. Otherwise, I have a meeting with West Haven Group at 2 p.m. My father looked at me for the first time since I entered. You're not joking. I never have, I replied, and if you still don't understand that, then there's no point continuing. He reached out his hand. Start over? I looked at the hand, once familiar, now foreign. Still, I shook it. A handshake between partners, not father and daughter. The deal was signed after 1 hour of negotiation. I received 40% equity, taken directly from his share, a voting board seat. Savannah retained 35%. My mother kept the remaining 25%, no longer involved in management. I walked out of Harold's office with the paperwork in hand and my head held high. I didn't reclaim an old position. I had just established a brand new order. 2 weeks after the signing at Harold's law office, I officially returned to Morgan & Co., but not as a silent shadow anymore. This time, my name was engraved on the brass plaque. Chief Operating Officer, Danielle Morgan, co-owner, 40% stake. For the first time in over a decade, I walked into the office without that tight knot of anxiety in my chest. I no longer had to strain to prove my worth, because now it was inked, signed, and legally recognized. We had to rebuild the company almost from scratch. Savannah, still holding the title of creative director, was now limited strictly to her actual expertise, branding, market communications, and customer experience. She no longer had a say in financial planning, project operations, or strategic decision-making. I oversaw the core, resource management, investment planning, construction procedures, contractor relations, and most crucially, rebuilding client trust after the Everpine fallout. The first thing I did, reset the company culture. I ended the unpaid late-night work grind, instituted a clear workweek policy, 45 hours, no more, exceptions only with prior approval. People weren't tools anymore. They were builders like me. I restructured executive meetings, short, transparent, effective. No more 3-hour lectures from my father repeating how real-world experience trumps everything. From now on, data drove decisions. Gut feelings? Reserved for marketing, not operations. Savannah struggled at first. She wasn't used to boundaries or systems, but instead of clashing, I coached. Every week, we met for a coffee and context session where I walked her through what she didn't know. from budget analysis to reading a technical construction report to evaluating risk in a build contract. Once, she snapped, "Why does everything have to be so complicated?" I smiled. Complication is what kept this company alive through 2 recessions. Gradually, she shifted, she took notes, asked better questions. Most importantly, she knew when to pause and listen. A month later, I received an email from Eleanor Wynne, Everpine's principal investor. "We're open to renegotiating, on the condition that the project is led solely by Danielle Morgan." I printed that email and pinned it to the internal bulletin board. The whole department went silent for a few seconds. Then, the applause. Not for individual glory, but because we were back in the race together. My father? He stepped back into an advisory role. No direct control. He now came in just 3 days a week, mostly reading reports in his office, occasionally giving input. Once, he walked into a meeting and looked lost among all the metrics and terminology. He knew his era had passed. I didn't exile him. I just defined clear boundaries. He could be my father, but my old boss? No more. 3 months later, Morgan & Co. re-signed Everpine with expanded scope and an added value of nearly $2 million. 4 former clients returned. 2 new investors pitched partnership offers. I sat in my new office, not my father's, but one I designed myself. Natural lighting, a dark wood desk, a tidy bookshelf, and a corner beanbag where I could read documents without tensing my shoulders. On the wall, I framed the very first sketch I ever made for Everpine, still stained with coffee at the bottom corner. Next to it, a small note from Eleanor. "Your consistency is what kept everything standing." I look at that frame every day as a reminder. Not everyone sees your worth from the start. But if you stay firm, eventually, you'll be the one holding the wheel. I'm no longer the forgotten daughter in someone else's spotlight. I'm Danielle Morgan, the one who didn't wait to be given power, but claimed it herself. Danielle's story is a powerful reminder that no one can take your worth unless you allow it. In real life, many quietly give their all, enduring dismissal from family or workplace, but that doesn't mean they're invisible. When you stand up, set terms, and reclaim what's rightfully yours, you don't just save yourself, you redefine fairness. True power doesn't come from a title, but from the courage to say enough. What do you think about Danielle's decision? Would you do the same in her shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more emotional family stories and powerful life lessons.